I'm flickering for other people, but hopefully you can still hear me. As I introduce our guest, Karen Winterich is the Gerald I. Sussman Professor in Sustainability at Penn State's Smeal College of Business. She conducts research in the area of consumer behavior with specific interest in consumer sustainable behaviors and has published dozens of peer-reviewed research articles in this area. She's been an invited speaker for Green Biz's Circularity 2.0 and the Can Manufacturing Institute, amongst others. And in addition to her research, Karen teaches sustainability marketing to undergraduate students. She developed the course as part of Smeal's sustainability education initiatives, and as part of the course, she partners with a variety of clients to give students experience addressing sustainability challenges. Karen's a great speaker, a great friend to the Sustainability Institute, and just an all-around champion of sustainability. And I know you all are going to have a great presentation today, and it's delight to welcome Karen to this talk today. So Karen, take it away.
All right, fantastic, thank you. So very happy to be sharing some of my research and other colleagues' work in this area so that hopefully it will be beneficial in motivating more behavior change for sustainability. So just to kind of get started, I like to start a lot of my talks with this image, which was really profound to me. It was originally in Life magazine in 1955, and then was featured again in June 2018 in the National Geographic magazine. And we were really at this time celebrating the invention of disposables, right? This was a great thing. We were excited about it. We didn't know at that time what life would look like, some 50 plus years later. And we know now that we need about 1.5, a little more than actually 1.6, 1.7 Earth to sustain humanity. We have needed more than one since 1970. So about 15 years after we started being excited and celebrating, yay, disposables, make our life more convenient, we said, wait, there's a problem here. We are using more resources than what our Earth can regenerate in a single year's time. So I'm guessing this is not new information to many of you because you're here today and you want to learn more about how to motivate and encourage more sustainable behavior. But I just wanted to set the stage with that. So we know times have changed, but we also know that our attitudes, which may be more favorable towards sustainability, are still not quite aligning with our behavior. There's definitely still this attitude and behavior or intention and behavior gap. I'm not going to have all the answers, but hopefully I'll have some tips and some strategies that might help shift our behaviors more on aligning with our attitudes. We know that in general, and this kind of goes for all behavior change, not just sustainability, that consumers, individuals, are looking for solutions. They want something that fixes a problem they have, per se, but they also want something that offers them benefits, right? So it has to be more than just solving the problem. If it does so, but it's not convenient to them, it's too costly to them, they're not going to do it. And in general, we underestimate how hard it is to change behavior. We all see this in our own lives when we set new goals for ourselves, we set New Year's resolutions, and they don't always pan out. Because it is hard to change behavior. But again, hopefully what I discussed today will give you some tools that will be useful. So just to start, I am a consumer psychologist, a consumer researcher, and so I look a lot about how do consumers make decisions. And there's 3 key reasons that we can keep in mind that can influence decision making. When I talk about this in class, I use hand motions like the head, the heart, and others, the people around us. So that helps you remember it, the head, the heart, and people around us. Really, it's rational, facts, information. Can help sometimes, but we know that really just giving people educational brochures and facts isn't probably going to change a lot of behavior. Feelings can do a little bit better. Oftentimes our emotions, our feelings can inspire us, motivate us to engage in behavior. And then a really big one is that social factor. Who we identify with, what the social norms are, can really motivate us to change even more than maybe the facts or our own emotional. And so we'll talk about each of these factors today. Just starting out with that rational piece, kind of informational piece, if I am just giving information, what are some ways I can present that will make it more effective? So one way is credibility. There's a lot of skepticism around, is this information accurate? Should I believe it, right? And there's a variety of ways that we can increase credibility. One is by using a 2-sided message. And what that really means is not acting like what you're promoting is going to save the world or solve all the problems, right? There's still probably some limitation, some downside to whatever behavior you're encouraging. And so recognizing that it won't save the world, but it's a start. It's not going to be easy. It might not be cheap. Acknowledging, hey, we know this isn't perfect, but there is still some benefit to be offered. And so recognizing that kind of downside and then promoting the upside can lend a bit more credibility to whatever message you're sharing. Another key thing is getting local. We know I've done a lot of research on donation behavior, which carries over into environmental behaviors, and people are much more likely to give and to support initiatives that are in their own community. Some of my very early research was after the Indian Ocean tsunami and Hurricane Katrina, so over a decade ago. But I found people are much more likely, probably not surprising to many of you, to donate to Katrina victims in that case than to the Indian Ocean tsunami victims. There's some other factors that matter, but it's really about if I feel connected to you and it's relevant to me, I'm more willing to support you. And so getting that messaging very local can be important. Giving them facts about the local community and not the world or the globe or kind of even nationally. And also knowing your audience and what their values are. And so I'm not going to get political. I really don't want to bring that up, but it is important. And so I do bring it up because we know from research that typically environmental sustainability is perceived as a liberal issue, right? And so that actually can turn off, a huge portion of your audience potentially. So maybe saying things like save the planet, it's not very local, but it might also turn off those that may not really think that, oh, my group doesn't value the environmental cause as much as the other group. And so there's research that looks at when you align messaging, in this case, I know it's small print there, but messaging that you align it with the political values. And that's simply in the case of conservatives, it can be more things like supporting those in your community, very strong community values again. And that this is the advice of important leaders. So looking to support authoritarian values, right? These can resonate more. So just understanding what are the values of your audience. There's no right or wrong value, but understanding what it is and then highlighting that in your message, as opposed to just saying, and I don't have the other message up here, but the one that aligned better with more of a liberal population was focusing on just saving the planet, right? Rather than joining the fight. And so it really depends on what their values are. So keep that in mind as well when you're trying to give information. Another rational side of things is incentives, the financial side, right? Which is the incentive component. And so financially, it might make sense rationally, to give it a discount for using a reusable mug in this case. And those can be effective. Anytime that you're using an incentive, you want to make sure you're being careful. You don't want to use an incentive that is higher than necessary to get behavior change. So people give out or give discounts, an incentive for bringing a reusable bag. They're not giving you $1, they might be giving you 5 cents. If that's all it takes to change behavior, then keep it small, because otherwise it's costing you more. And plan for how they might avoid the behavior. So there is one case study where they started charging by weight for trash, and people started taking their trash to like local garbage cans in the town, in the city, right? So it wasn't a solution, just caused a lot more problems. So be prepared for this, but incentives can be effective. Although one thing to mention is the way you set that up. One thing that could be more effective, just in this coffee example for using a reusable cup, would be if instead of saying you get a discount, you save money, actually saying that you lose money when you don't bring your reusable cup. That upcharge, in essence, for having to pay for a cup can be a lot more influential in getting people to change their behavior. And this is because of loss aversion. It impacts lots of our behaviors, but we are much more likely to engage in behavior to avoid a loss than to just get a gain or just save a few cents. We want to avoid paying anything extra. So we can think about how we set up our incentives that way. Then switching over a little bit to the feelings and the emotion side of things. Emotions really can empower action, but it's important to have fun, use humor, use hope. So I have just one example down here. That's the Bottle Bank Arcade. This was in Sweden, actually. But they were trying to encourage people to recycle. And they can, we have financial incentives and things for recycling. But this was just making it fun. And they had hundreds of people using this in just one night because it was so entertaining, right? It brought them joy and fun to use this. We can sometimes use negative emotions, but they have to be used very carefully. They're often too much and they turn people off, lead to reactance. Don't make me feel guilty. Who are you to make me feel this way or tell me to do this? So just one example is a signage that says for the trash bin, "Are you sure?" And that's kind of a guilt-inducing message. And unfortunately, there are some things that really do need to go in the trash bin. And so when you question that, you might actually lead the consumer to say, "I'm not sure, and you're making me feel bad about doing it. So I'll put it over here in the recycling bin." And that's just going to increase contamination. That's not going to actually help, improve recycling because you're just contaminating the recycling bin. So I'm not saying you can never use negative emotions, but it tends to be better to try to focus on more positive ones. Fun, humor, hope, praise. Those can be more empowering for consumers. And then the social factor, which really is big, is in social norms. This is just thinking of like the informal social rules. We know, social norms are powerful. And we often think of it in the negative sense and peer pressure, right? But they can be just as powerful for positive behavior. So let's use them that way, right? Use them for good. So this one example up here is from a high school poster contest in Utah. But my mom idles less than your mom. That's a social norm, but it's also kind of using a little bit of humor, right? And so it's got that fun emotional aspect with the social influence aspect there. When you are using social norms, it's really important that what you're trying to promote is something other people are already doing. So I know this is, again, probably small font, but this is not really a great example of trying to discourage people from texting while driving, because it's saying that pretty much everyone's doing it, or at least the majority are. 77% of young adults are confident that they can safely text while driving. So if I'm a young adult that can't safely text while driving, then I'm an idiot and it's my problem. So that makes me feel bad if I can't text and drive, right? So we actually want to use information where it's saying more, the majority of people, 75% of people are using reusable mugs, thinks it's smart to use reusable mugs, have switched to renewable energy. You want to use social norms when it's the behavior that the majority are already doing. Otherwise, don't tell them that most people aren't, because then they say, why should I bother if no one else is doing it? And this is also, of course, best for public behavior. So if you were doing a water conservation, you probably don't want to be using social norms to encourage, reduce showering time, because no one really knows that, right? But you could use social norms to try to reduce sprinkler usage, because that's very public. Your neighbors can see that. And I might be kind of shamed by the social norm into using my sprinkler system less. So think about the behavior and whether social norms can be effective for it. One example, and many of you may have seen this on your electricity bills already, is how they rate kind of your comparison in your utility usage, your energy usage, to your neighbors. But in this research, they actually found that that little sidebar where it says, how are you doing? Good, great, was really effective, because this is kind of a private behavior, right? So nobody else necessarily knows how I'm doing this. I'm just getting this information. But when you paired that social information with positive praise, it tended to be a lot more effective at seeing reduced energy use in the future. So something else to keep in mind, how you compare these together. Another thing that can be helpful for the social aspect, and personally too, is commitment. And so this can work in the case of having an entire group make a commitment. Maybe it's a local organization, maybe it's individuals in your borough, at the university. It's key that when you're using commitment, people don't feel like they're forced into it, right? Because if you make people sign a commitment, they're just going to react against it, and they're going to find ways to avoid it because they have negative feelings about being forced into it. But if you can encourage them and get them to voluntarily do it, their self-concept will say, I committed to this, I'm going to do it. And you can make that written and maybe kind of publicize, promote those that have agreed. It can really spur that behavior to continue. So commitment can kind of be an add-on to using some of these social norms and social behaviors. In addition to the norms, those kind of informal rules we think of like for peer pressure, we can also have social diffusion, which can be very effective. There was a study about 10 years ago that looked at the diffusion of solar panels in neighborhoods, and they found that a 1% increase on the street level, just seeing them on homes, led to nearly a 10% increase in adoption. And the most interesting part of the study to me was that it wasn't from word of mouth, because they found that they were all different contractors. It wasn't the same contractor that kept doing it, like, oh, I really had a great contractor and they can install them for you. People just saw it, and that led this adoption to increase. And so social diffusion is when these ideas take off naturally. One way to really get it to increase is, of course, making it very public, doing things visibly, and using influencers. So who are influencers? Of course, we think about, you know, these massive influencers, but they can be small influencers in your community. They could be, you know, a government leader that's well respected. They could be just someone, you know, a local business owner that's very popular. Anyone that might just be known to kind of be a trendsetter to some extent. All of those individuals could be a good person to kind of set the stage, have others observe, and then they will follow and adopt for social diffusion. I just have down here a book, Contagious, Why Things Catch On by Jonah Berger. If you're interested in learning more about kind of the process of social diffusion, what works, telling stories, making it emotional, this is a great book on that as well. I get no credit for that, but I think it's an interesting book talking about kind of this idea of making ideas catch on. How can we get trends to pick up? But of course, none of this, the information, the emotions, even the social aspects, they don't work if we forget. I feel great. That message was really inspiring to me. I want to do it. But in the moment, I forgot that that's what I wanted to do, that I wanted to change my behavior. So we really need to build habits. How can we build habits? One is by prompts. If you're going to prompt someone, it should be a reminder and it should be very specific. And it should be right at the time or the location when you want the behavior to happen. So sending friendly email reminders about that, not going to be very effective, because again, I'm like, oh, right, I have a good attitude, I want to do it, but when I go to do the behavior, I've already forgotten. The prompts should be noticeable, and they're best for behaviors that are repetitive, things I'm going to do every day, maybe every week, so I remember it. So it's just some examples of those. I love this, really simple, nothing fancy, but don't forget your bags outside the grocery store. Because how many of you have been into the grocery store and been at the checkout, oh darn, I forgot my bags. I'm much more likely, if I'm not standing in line, to go get my bags. If I see that on my way into the store, I'll run back and grab them. And eventually I'll form a habit. The old Post-it note trick works, you know, for personally, I can write myself a Post-it note, but having an app from your organization that might allow people to set a reminder on their phone, carry a reusable mug that goes off every day at 7:55 when I leave my house or something, would get me in the habit, and soon I won't need that reminder. And even things like showering, having a little timer in there, or of course there's fancier versions now where it changes colors. It will go from green into red to warn you that you want to decrease your shower time. You should be wrapping up. And these are all reminders like, oh, right, I wanted to do it, I just forgot. So these prompts can be very helpful. Other things to think of, the default option. This can be very powerful. We know in countries where the default for organ donation is to donate and you have to opt out, they have about 99.9% of people as organ donors. The US has the opposite, where we opt in to be an organ donor, and we're about 50%, 55%. And this is not just to the US, this is many countries and all default kind of options like this. So this is one example where you can see they have this option to spare me the napkins and the plasticware, but you have to opt into that. Many people may miss this, they may forget. If that was the default and I had to opt in to actually get it, we'd save a lot of wasted plasticware and napkins, right? Similar things like, I try not to take a plastic bag if I don't need one. But if the default is not giving one and I have to ask, we'll use far less. Same for straws. And we can apply this to other things like energy, right? If the default option is to have renewable energy and I have to opt out of it and choose fossil fuels, I'm probably more likely to stick with renewable energy. And so we can just think about, how can I set my program up that people are automatically going to be doing this unless they choose otherwise. If you give them the choice to engage in the sustainable behavior, that takes effort. Simply opting in, simply figuring out where do I click the box takes more effort. So think about the default if that's a possibility. Make it convenient. These are all kind of examples of not convenient. So many times hotels ask you to reuse towels, but I get there and I realize there's like one hook, and if I'm with a family, there's not space for us to dry up, to put our towels up to dry. And so making sure that there's multiple hooks, that there aren't over the toilet, that they're accessible. Using social influence can help too. Having little cards or door hangers that say X% of people, 75% of people in this room reuse towels really boost that up. So pairing these. This was a hotel that said, help us recycle, but there was one bin that was unmarked in the hotel room. How do I recycle? Even simple things like having these water fountains, that's the kind of infrastructure that we need to encourage more reusable water bottles and less plastic disposable ones. But some of them have a little button you have to push. And as silly as it may seem, trying to hold whatever you have in your hand and your water bottle and your lid and press the button is actually really inconvenient. And so a simple thing like, how is the water bottle, is it just a sensor, can increase the likelihood that people will engage in the behavior. So how can you make it more convenient? Even small tweaks to increase convenience. Making it tangible, making it very vivid and concrete for people to understand. This is still kind of informational, but it's very relevant to them. So I love this example. This was actually at Shavers Creek, which is in the State College area. In the 7 seconds it takes to read this, 1 metric ton of plastic is dumped in the ocean. Wow, that makes you stop and think. Similarly, information like small cracks in your windows can be the same as having a football-sized hole in your wall. Okay, wow, I'm going to stop and think about it now. Other ways to think about making it tangible is through labeling, right? Because if they're a verified or certified label, that can make us recognize pretty easily that this has some sustainable benefit to it. Just one more example is this Tide advertisement saying that if everyone in New York City washed their laundry in cold water for 1 day, it would be enough electricity for the entire Empire State Building for 1 month. Again, like a wow, that's very concrete and vivid. I can picture that, and it makes me want to, be inspired and motivated to change my behavior. On the inspiration line, this is some of my own research that I've done on recycling, and we did one actually at Penn State tailgates back when we did those. And this was either asking people to just recycle to help the environment, or we specifically said, making it tangible to them, recycle to make new products. Now, I'm sure many of you know the definition of recycling is basically to turn into something new. But the average consumer does not think, what happens if I recycle versus not? They don't think about what it will actually turn into. And so we found that we had about 53% of the tailgate waste in the areas in the parking lots we studied recycling when they received the message that it was to give new life to products. And this led to inspiration we found in subsequent studies. In a similar study that was done in residence halls, we did a waste audit. And we found that when we put these large posters above the disposal areas, that when we told them what it makes, what things will turn into, gave them this very tangible examples of the outcomes of recycling, we found out that what they put into the landfill bin was only about 50% recyclable, as opposed to about 63% recyclable. So in this case, if you're familiar with waste auditing, and this was looking at what amount are they putting in the landfill that should be recycled, we were able to cut that down by about 13%, cutting it down to about half being recyclable, because they saw this more tangible information of what it makes. So you can have this inspiration happening with this more tangible, concrete information. The self-concept is another one. We want to be thinking about, individuals. What do we value? So we want information. We want to be consistent with ourselves. So if I commit to something, I'm going to feel a little bad if I don't follow through, most likely. So that leads to self-consistency. If you can give them messages that help them feel like they're making a difference, not a generic make a difference, but an actual tangible concrete, I'll feel like I'm having more of an impact. And another fact that has been found in some prior research, an article in 2016, is that sustainability may actually be perceived to be too feminine. So some people may not want to engage in sustainable behaviors if they're public and they're perceived to be less masculine. And that's part of their self-concept, is being more masculine. So you can see some brands are actually using this. This is a Jack Daniels advertisement that says, with all due respect to progress, the world could use a little less plastic. And so they're using very masculine advertisement, but they're still saying, hey, we value sustainability. If you watch the Super Bowl, you might have seen the Dr. Squatch ad for their soap and their body products. Again, they're kind of playing off of this idea that some people may perceive that sustainability is not masculine, but indeed it very much can be, right? So trying to break through that maybe stereotype or misperception. So a lot of the information that I've talked about today has been put into a framework by some other marketing faculty members, White and Habib. And if this helps you remember it, I want you to think of the SHIFT framework. And so the S standing for the social influence, H is standing for the habit, I is the individual self, and those ideas of the self concept, making sure things align and we feel good about who we are. Feelings and cognition, kind of both the emotion and the informational part. And then the tangibility, making it real, right? So if that's helpful to you, think about the SHIFT framework to follow through and see what you can do for those. But I just want, before I wrap up, want to make sure that we recognize it's not just about promoting the benefits of the behavior you want to change, not just highlighting all the good things that will happen if you engage in this behavior. That's good. That's a good starting point. It's important to be very specific. So even an example like reducing hot water use, that's too broad. How do you want them to do it? In the shower, by using cold water for clothes, reducing the number of times you wash the dishwasher. Break it down and be specific. And then identify what the barriers are. Just as important as what are the benefits is figuring out why aren't they doing it. And so just as a simple example here, we can think about biking to or from work. It's not just about a key reasons could be, that, well, it's cheaper, right? That's a benefit to it. I'll save money on gas. Maybe even I'll burn calories, that's a benefit. But maybe the bigger reason is that they don't feel safe, or when they get to work, they feel like they need to take a shower and there's no way to do that. But simultaneously figuring out what's the alternative behavior. What are they doing currently that I don't want them to do anymore, that I want to stop? And can I make that harder to do? So can I make it more expensive to park? If traffic gets worse because we add bike lanes, I'm more motivated to bike. Of course, this problem here is a major infrastructure change, right? It's not going to be something that you implement overnight. But the key is to think about not just what are the benefits if they do it, but why aren't they doing it? And is the behavior they're currently doing, can we make it harder to do that? Which naturally makes the desired behavior easier, right? More desirable to the consumer. So I will wrap up here. But I also wanted to just mention this book by Doug Mackenzie Moore on fostering sustainable behavior. And this image is taken from that book, where it really helps you think about what are the barriers? Is it, that I'm just forgetting and then I want to use prompts? Or is it that I just don't have motivation and I need that incentive to motivate me? This book is available for free online to access. If you sign up, you can read the entire book online. So I wanted to make sure I get a lot of great information about community-based behavior change in here, if that's a good reference. And then overall, I just want to, close with saying that information, as we probably know, is not going to change the behavior by itself, just giving out factual information. But there are lots of strategies, social influence factors, emotional factors, simple reminders and prompts to form habits that we can use to overcome the barriers so we can maximize behavior change. So here are some resources I believe will be sent out and shared whenever the recording is also shared, but just in case that's helpful, this book, the SHIFT framework, some of my own research on recycling. And otherwise, I believe we will open it up for some Q&A.